So obviously the first thing I did when I got the R5 was check out the eye autofocus, and let me tell you, it's awesome. Alright, so the R5 has a ton of great specs, and you probably know that if you're watching this video. You've probably looked it up, you're wondering what it's like to actually shoot with it. So I got this one on loan from Canon just for a couple days. Luckily I had an MLS game to shoot so I could practice with it, and I set up a fitness shoot so that I could practice some portraits with it as well. Got the R5 because it's the better version of the R5 and R6, but basically everything I'm going to say about the R5 is most likely going to be able to apply to the R6. So if you're looking at either one of these, this is still going to help you out. During warm-ups, I was testing the mechanical shutter versus the electronic shutter, the eye focus for action versus just single point. Here's my initial thoughts right after I used this camera to take this. It was just in my car, just with the lights in the car, so you can kind of see some high ISO performance too on video. Yeah, let's take a look. Alright, so just got done photographing the Revs game and just wanted to give some first impressions of the R5. I used it probably for about 10 or so minutes using the mechanical shutter, also using the electronic shutter, using the eye focus, and just using regular center point. And I also used it a little bit during warm-ups, just testing it out. It was pretty good light, so not sure about the high ISO stuff right now. But we'll see. So first couple impressions are the eye focus for soccer, at least. Wasn't a huge fan of it. There's just so many people running back and forth. It kind of would pick up on some other people. It also loved the net. I felt like if I had the focus on the keeper's head and then he dove and moved, it would actually just start picking up on the net a little bit, and it would try to follow him sometimes it wouldn't. So I don't know, I didn't like using it that much, so I switched back to the center point. And the 20 frames a second is crazy, and it's silent, and so you just hold it down and you have no idea like how many photos you're taking. It takes forever for you to actually be able to scroll through and then tag images, which if you're taking 20 frames a second, you want to tag your images so you don't have to cycle through those when you have to get the images out quickly. So that was a little bit of a downside for the 20 frames a second. We'll see how the rolling shutter is. I watched some other reviews and saw that the rolling shutter was an issue for them sometimes shooting sports with like things moving really quickly. It would get a little distorted, so we'll see how like the ball looks in a lot of the photos. The mechanical shutter, it said should be 12 frames a second. I tried to do a little test on the scoreboard before the game. It seemed like I was only getting 8 frames a second. I don't know if that's because I have the lens adapter on and I've only used my old lenses, the EF lenses, so I don't know if that makes it go down a little bit. I have a pretty fast SD card in. I was shooting JPEG, so that shouldn't really have affected it too much. But I felt like I could only get about 8 frames a second, so that was a little disappointing. If it was 12, that would be awesome. 10 would be great. 8 is fine. It's not bad. But when you're comparing it to the 1DX at like 14, then it's a little bit of an issue. Yeah, so I mean, it's impressive. It's awesome. If it was the only camera I had, it'd be amazing. But I definitely like shooting with the 1DX2 is what I have more for sports in terms of photography. That's just initial reactions. I'll go back and sort of look through the photos, see how many were in focus, see if the eye focus really followed the players really well and the players I wanted it to follow. All right, my arm is getting tired from holding this up, so gotta get home, take Rosie out, and get some dinner. All right, so I also have some examples to show you of the different settings that I was testing out and using. So let's take a look and see. So electronic shutter is crazy, right? Like, it's really odd shooting with a silent shutter and 20 frames a second when you're looking through, and it's just like, you can barely tell that you're even taking photos, and then when you review them, you have 1,000 photos. Like, literally, I think in the 5 to 10 minutes I was shooting with this camera, I took probably 1,000 photos on the electronic shutter just because you're taking those sequences. So during the game, here's one sequence I took, and you can see how it gives you a ton of options to choose that peak action moment. But it's so many photos to scroll through, and it actually takes a little bit for it to buffer and come up on the screen, so you can't look right away. This isn't that bad in soccer because you're not checking the camera as much, but in other sports where you're taking a photo of the pitcher and then you want to review and then the next pitch comes, that little lag time is gonna hurt you maybe a little bit in trying to find those photos and tag them in camera. So this sequence was actually just over 2 seconds, as you can see on the side. And right, it's great. You can pick out that peak moment that you want because you're essentially just taking that short video clip and then you can pick your favorite frame. Now I saw other people in other reviews mention the rolling shutter effect with the electronic shutter, so I wanted to test that out a little bit. And I tested it out during warm-ups. I noticed it's not the best when you're panning the camera, and you can see that when I'm swinging across from the shooter to the goalie. You can see the goalpost is a little crooked. If you zoom in on the ball, it's not quite perfectly circular. And so I wouldn't typically use the electronic shutter for myself doing these news photos when you're supposed to accurately represent the game that's happening. I just wouldn't want anything to happen where you're getting this weird ball or maybe a leg or a bat or something that's moving really quickly, or you're panning to get a photo and just things don't seem right. So I wouldn't really use the electronic shutter to shoot these high action sports. So I might use this on occasion for high school games or other certain sports that have less fast action. Times when I don't need to make sure that I get every specific moment, when I just want generally good photos of a game, then I can just throw out those ones that might have a little bit of a rolling shutter effect. All right, now check out these sequences for the eye focus. So in warm-ups I was testing it out again on the goalies at first, and I noticed it loved catching on to the net, which a lot of autofocus systems do. And even after I had it trained on the goalie's face and his eye, you could see the little thing show up on his eye, and it was awesome. It was great. But then he'd sort of dive a little bit and it would catch on to the net. And I wasn't exactly sure if that's just how the lighting was or what, but I could tell that it wasn't something I was really going to want to use during the game. I tried it out for a couple plays, and I definitely would personally stick to a single point when I'm shooting action photography. It did work pretty well in certain scenarios. I tested it out on some other players warming up, and I would move my camera a little bit so that the player would sort of shift in the frame, and the focus would follow that person's eye as long as it was, visible and well lit. So while I didn't use it for the action photos as much, I did use that eye focus for my portrait session, and it worked really well in that case. All right, now so for the fitness session I did with my friend Erin Bailey. Go follow her on Instagram for some great life inspiration and stuff. I'll put her link in the bio. So on this shoot is where I really saw the benefits of the electronic shutter and the eye focusing system, because I could train the focus on her and allow the camera to track her through the frame, which meant I could keep the camera relatively still and keep the composition that I wanted, and she could just move throughout the frame, letting the camera focus. Typically I'd have to either move the camera with her, try to move the focus point, or just pre-focus because she's not moving that much. I could pre-focus, but as you can see I was shooting at f1.6, so any too much movement and she won't be in focus the entire time. So it's really nice to have the camera just follow her head as she's moving in this sequence that you can see here. So it didn't always work perfectly, but when the eye was well lit and there wasn't much else going on in the frame, it did work really well, and it was very helpful in these types of shoots. Same thing with being able to shoot the 20 frames a second. As you can see here later, I took so many photos in this one just sequence of her running by, and I can go through and I can pick out the exact sort of right moment. Do I want some hair? Do I not want some hair? And pick out that sort of peak moment when people are running, because when people are running, there's only a few little milliseconds where they're look really well, because when they land, their skin falls down and things like that, and it just doesn't look good. So the more options you have for those types of photos, the better. Now when I was testing this out, I'm not concerned about the specs. I'm really looking to see, does it help me get photos that I couldn't get with other cameras? Does it fit into my shooting style? And does it make my life easier? Because if it doesn't do those things, then the specs don't matter. It's not gonna replace any of my cameras, and it's not gonna really help me improve anything. And I just have to say, I do love this camera. It was really great. I got some great images from it. It does have some flaws, and I'm definitely not gonna be buying it. That's mainly because I don't need a new camera body right now. One thing I didn't really get to try out that I would really wanna know is the high ISO performance. But nowadays the
cameras all have really great high ISO performance, and I'm really not too worried about it. So I took a couple selfies just here at pretty high ISO and just get a feel for what that image quality is just from those couple little selfies. I was just starting out, I could only have one camera to do it all. I'd probably pick this one, but I don't. I already have 3 cameras and they all work really well. They're all great. One's great for sports action, great for portraits, you know, events, things like that. So I'm not gonna get this camera to replace any of those. But if my 5D craps out, then yeah, maybe I'd get this one or the R6 to replace it, and I'd be really happy with it. I love the little flip screen when I'm doing these YouTube videos now. This was perfect. It's so light. Like I could just walk around, as you saw in the other video, just walking the dog, just holding this, getting a couple random stares from neighbors, but whatever. Right, so it's super light. Love it for video. It's been amazing for portraits, good megapixels. Only a little bit of a knock on the action photography, just because of the mechanical shutter and the little bit of the rolling shutter. So while I would really love to just have this camera as my full-time workhorse right now, can't justify dropping $4 grand on it when I have 3 good cameras. So it's definitely going back today, but I would suggest if you're looking at it, I mean, test it out. Like, I only had it for a couple days, but I really loved using it. And it's great for a lot of multi-purpose shooting. A little bit knock if you just want it for sports, I'd maybe go with the R6. It's a little cheaper, it has the same specs except for the megapixels in the video. So if you're, you know, doing a lot of portraits, you probably want this one. If you're doing a lot of video, if you want that 4K, 120 frames a second, you gotta go this one. You can't go with the R6. But the R6 does seem like a great, you know, alternative to this one as well. All right, so I love using this. If you have any other questions, let me know in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them and just let you know my experiences. All right, see you next time.